The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, that particular frequency hospitals perfected somewhere between comfort and clinical precision. Olivia Hart's eyelids felt weighted, each attempt to lift them a small war against gravity and sedation. When her vision finally cleared, the first thing she registered was white. White ceiling tiles, white walls, white sheets pulled tight across her chest like a straitjacket made of cotton. Her mouth tasted of metal and something chemical she couldn't name. Her right arm throbbed beneath layers of gauze and tape. When she tried to move her head, pain lanced through her ribs, sharp enough to steal her breath. A nurse materialized beside the bed, young, maybe 25, with kind eyes that had probably seen too much death for someone so new to the profession. The woman's hand was already reaching for the IV drip before Olivia could form words. "You're awake, that's good. How's your pain level, 1 to 10? Olivia's throat worked. The words came out scratched, barely recognizable as her own voice. "What happened?" "Car accident. You've been out for about 6 hours. Dr. Reyes will be in soon to explain everything." Car accident. The words floated in Olivia's consciousness without anchoring to memory. She tried to reach back through the bond, searching for the moment before impact, but found only fragments. Rain on windshield glass, headlights smearing across wet pavement, the sickening crunch of metal that she felt more than heard. And something else. A voice. Deep, steady, cutting through panic like a lighthouse beam through storm fog. There was a man. The words left Olivia's lips before she fully formed the thought. "Before the doctor, someone was talking to me." The nurse's expression softened into something that looked like admiration. "Ethan, the security guard. He kept you stable until Dr. Reyes arrived. You're lucky he was there." Security guard. The phrase settled wrong in Olivia's chest, mismatched with the memory of those hands, the absolute certainty in that voice. She wanted to ask more, but the nurse was already checking monitors, adjusting tubes, doing that efficient dance medical professionals performed around the barely conscious. "Rest now. You're going to be fine, Miss Hart." Fine. Olivia closed her eyes and let the morphine pull her back under, but that voice followed her down into the dark. "You're going to see the sunrise." A promise made by a stranger who had no business making promises to someone like her. The memory swam up through the drugs, fragmentary but insistent. 16 hours earlier, Ethan Ward's alarm went off at 9:30 p.m., same as it had every night for the past 4 years. The sound was an old-fashioned bell, the kind that rattled rather than chirped, because he'd learned in the Army that you couldn't ignore a sound that made your teeth hurt. He was awake before the second ring hand slapping the button with the precision of someone who'd been waking to urgent sounds for most of his adult life. The apartment was small, 2 bedrooms in a building that had seen better decades. The walls were thin enough that he could hear the couple next door arguing about money, the same argument they had every Thursday like clockwork. The carpet was beige in the way that suggested it had once been another color before years of feet and neglect wore it down to this neutral surrender. But it was clean. That mattered. The dishes were washed and drying in the rack. Grace's backpack sat by the door, already packed for school the next morning. The bills were paid, even if paying them meant Ethan ate ramen 3 nights a week and pretended he wasn't still hungry. He moved through his evening routine with mechanical efficiency. Shower, shave. The same security uniform he'd worn yesterday, washed and pressed. The way the Army taught him to press things crisp enough to pass inspection, even though no one at St. Haven Hospital gave a damn about crease lines. His reflection in the bathroom mirror showed a man who looked older than 38, lines carved deep around his eyes, silver threading through dark hair at his temples. The face of someone who'd seen things, done things, carried things no one should have to carry alone. The tattoo on his left wrist caught the bathroom light as he buttoned his cuff. Black numbers, military precision, 3 to 187 ENF 68W. His unit designation and military occupational specialty. Combat medic. Once upon a time, those numbers meant something. Once upon a time, they meant he could save people when saving people mattered most. Now they were just ink on skin, a reminder of a life he'd walked away from, because staying would have meant losing the only thing that mattered more than the mission. Grace was already asleep when he pushed open her bedroom door. 8 years old, 3rd grade, all elbows and questions and a smile that could crack open his chest with its purity. She'd kicked off her blankets, again the way she always did, sprawled across her narrow bed like a starfish. Her homework sat completed on her desk. Math problems worked out in careful pencil, the erasure marks showing where she'd caught her own mistakes. Smart kid. Smarter than he'd been at that age, smarter than he probably was now. He pulled the blanket back over her shoulders, tucked it gently so he wouldn't wake her. Her breathing was steady, peaceful, the breathing of someone who didn't yet know how to be afraid of the dark. He wanted to keep it that way for as long as the world would let him. The photo on her nightstand caught his eye like it did every night. Three people frozen in a moment that felt like it belonged to someone else's life. Ethan in his dress uniform, younger face, less weathered. A woman with Grace's eyes and a smile that had always made him feel like he'd won something he didn't deserve. And between them, a little girl who'd just turned 3, gap-toothed and giggling at something the camera hadn't captured. Sarah, his wife, Grace's mother. 5 years dead and the wound still fresh enough to bleed if he pressed on it wrong. He didn't let himself press on it tonight. There was work to do, and grief was a luxury he had learned to schedule around his shifts. The drive to St. Haven Hospital took 20 minutes through streets that looked different at night. Familiar landmarks transformed by darkness and street lights into something slightly alien. Ethan knew this route the way he knew his own hands, every pothole, every traffic light that ran long, every shortcut that shaved 30 seconds off the commute. The hospital rose from the city blocks like a fortress of 15 stories of glass and steel and the accumulated weight of human suffering. Ambulances idled near the emergency entrance, their crews leaning against the vehicles with the weary patience of people who knew another call was always 3 minutes away. Ethan parked in the employee lot, grabbed his thermos of coffee that was already lukewarm, and headed for the security office to clock in. The night shift supervisor, Marcus Webb, was a retired cop who'd seen 40 years of city violence and decided the hospital's security was his idea of a calm retirement. He looked up from his crossword puzzle when Ethan walked in, reading glasses perched on a nose that had been broken at least twice. "Ward, you're early." Traffic was light. Traffic's always light when you're coming in and the rest of the world's going bomb. Marcus checked his watch, an old analog with a cracked crystal he refused to replace. "Reynolds called in sick again. That's 3 times this month. You mind covering the ER entrance solo tonight?" "No problem." "Course it's no problem. You never have a problem." Marcus's tone carried something between respect and concern, the way a man might talk about someone who worked too hard and never complained about it. "You eat dinner." "Had something before I left." A lie, but a small one. Ethan had learned that people stopped asking questions if you gave them simple answers. Marcus went back to his crossword, and Ethan grabbed the radio and keys for his assigned rounds. The emergency room entrance at night was its own ecosystem, populated by people at their worst moments, coming through those automatic doors with injuries and illnesses and the kind of desperation that made strangers into family and family into strangers. Ethan had worked this door long enough to recognize the patterns. The weeknight crowd was usually smaller, manageable, a steady trickle, rather than the weekend flood of bar fights and car crashes. He took up his position near the sliding glass doors, visible, but not obtrusive the way good security should be. A presence that said help if you need it, authority if you cause trouble, and mostly just invisible unless circumstances demanded otherwise. An elderly woman shuffled in, leaning on a cane, her adult son hovering beside her with the careful attention of someone who'd already lost one parent and couldn't bear losing another. Ethan held the door, offered a slight nod that the son returned with gratitude in his eyes. A teenager came in 20 minutes later, clutching a skateboard and a wrist bent at an angle God never intended. Ethan pointed him toward registration watch to make sure he made it that far without fainting. The rhythm of the night settled over him like a familiar coat. Check the doors, walk the perimeter, monitor the waiting room for signs of escalating tension, because grief and pain had a way of making people unpredictable. Help the nurses move equipment. Fetch water for patients who'd been waiting too long. Be useful in the small ways that made the machine of emergency medicine run slightly smoother. Most nights, nothing happened. Most nights he clocked in, did his rounds, clocked out, and drove home feeling like he'd contributed exactly nothing to the world, despite having been present in a place where contribution mattered. But he'd learned to find peace and routine in the simple mathematics of showing up and doing the job, because the alternative was thinking too much about what he'd left behind. The radio crackled at 11:27. All units incoming, trauma, ETA 3 minutes. Car accident, single vehicle, major impact. Adult female critical condition. Ethan's body responded before his conscious mind engaged muscle memory from a different life taking over. He moved toward the ambulance bay, checking sight lines, making sure the path was clear. Other staff were already converging, nurses and techs moving with practiced urgency, but no doctor yet. Dr. Reyes was the on-call tonight, and if he wasn't here, that meant he was still en route from wherever he lived, stuck in traffic or bad luck, or both. The ambulance screamed into the bay 2 minutes later, lights painting the concrete in alternating red and white. The back doors flew open, and paramedics were already moving synchronized chaos that Ethan recognized from 1,000 field evacuations, where seconds meant the difference between bleeding out and making it home. The woman on the stretcher was young mid-30s, wearing what had probably been an expensive business suit before physics and metal turned it into rags. Blood soaked through the fabric in patches that kept growing. Her face was pale, that particular shade of bloodless that Ethan had learned to fear more than any wound, because it meant the body was already beginning its shutdown sequence. The paramedic was calling out vitals BP numbers that made the nurses exchange glances. Ethan could read like text. Dropping fast. Critical. Not good. Where's Dr. Reyes? Stuck on the bridge. Accident. Backing up traffic. ETA 15 minutes. 15 minutes. Ethan knew what 15 minutes meant for someone losing blood this fast. He stepped forward, already pulling off his security jacket, that old combat medic instinct overriding every piece of civilian conditioning he'd built up over 5 years. Let me help. The head nurse, Jennifer Chen, had worked at St. Haven long enough to know Ethan's background, one of the few people who'd bothered to read past his job title to the resume underneath. She hesitated only a second before nodding. Exam 3, now. They wheeled the stretcher through the automatic doors, and Ethan was already assessing as they moved his training, clicking into place like a weapon being reassembled. Breathing shallow but present. Pulse weak but consistent. Major bleeding from the right arm, possible internal trauma given the steering wheel impact visible across her chest. In exam 3, under the harsh fluorescent lights, he got his first clear look at her face. Recognition hit him like cold water. Everyone in the city knew that face. Olivia Hart, CEO of Hart Tech Industries, billionaire before 30. The woman who'd built an empire through allegedly ruthless business practices and a work ethic that made other ambitious people look lazy. Right now, she looked human and mortal and scared, which was somehow more jarring than if she'd been unconscious. Her eyes found as dark and unfocused, but aware enough to register fear. Her lips moved, forming words that barely made sound. Please, just make it fast. I don't want the pain. Ethan's chest tightened in a way he'd learned to compartmentalize in combat zones, but had never quite mastered in civilian life. He moved closer, letting her see his face, using his voice the way he'd used it for soldiers who thought they were dying, because sometimes belief was as important as medical intervention. Not tonight. You're going to see the sunrise. Something in his tone cut through her panic. Her hand reached out, trembling, seeking anchor. He caught it, held it, his grip firm enough to transmit certainty. Stay with me. Focus on my voice. You're safe now. His other hand was already working, applying pressure to the bleeding on her arm, checking pupil response, assessing in the systematic way the Army had drilled into him, until assessment became instinct. Jennifer appeared beside him with gauze and tape, working in tandem with the efficiency of someone who'd done this dance before. Talk to her. Keep her conscious. Ethan leaned closer, maintaining eye contact, keeping his voice steady and low. What's your name? Olivia. The word was barely audible. Okay, Olivia, I'm Ethan. You were in an accident, but you're in a hospital now. Doctor's on his way. We're going to get you through this. Her breathing was rapid, too rapid, edging toward hyperventilation. He recognized the signs of shock setting in the body's panic response when trauma overwhelmed its ability to cope. He squeezed her hand slightly, drawing her attention back to his face. Breathe with me, in through your out through your mouth, slow, like this. He demonstrated, exaggerating the motion so she could follow. She tried stuttering at first, but her breathing began to match his rhythm. Good, that was good. Consciousness meant her brain was getting oxygen. Oxygen meant time. The monitors beeped steadily, numbers fluctuating, but holding within survivable ranges. Jennifer had the IV started, fluids running to compensate for blood loss. Ethan kept pressure on the arm wound while watching for signs of internal bleeding, his mind running through triage protocols he'd used in desert heat with mortar rounds landing close enough to feel. "You're doing great, Olivia. Stay with me. Tell me something. Where were you going tonight?" "Home." The word came out thick, her tongue struggling with coordination. "Board meeting, ran late. What kind of company?" "Tech, software, defense contracts." "Important work." "Supposed to be." Her eyes started to drift closed. "Hey, Olivia, look at me." He kept his voice firm command presence without being harsh. "Eyes on me. You don't get to check out yet. I need you to stay angry about that meeting. Stay mad you didn't get home. Channel that. Use it." Her eyes snapped back to his, and for a moment he saw something fierce flash across her face, that CEO intensity that had probably built her empire. Good. Anger was useful. Anger kept people fighting. That's it. Stay right there. Be pissed off. You've got things to do tomorrow, right? People who need you. Board presentation, quarterly results. Then you stay here and you give them hell tomorrow. But tonight you let me do my job and you do yours. Your job is to keep breathing and stay conscious. Can you do that? Yes. Stronger this time. The minutes stretched, each one marked by monitor beeps and Jennifer's quiet updates on vitals. Ethan kept talking, keeping Olivia engaged, pulling her back every time her focus started to slip. He'd done this before, held dying men together with pressure and will and conversation until the medevac arrived. But it never got easier, never stopped feeling like trying to hold water in his bare hands. When Dr. Reyes finally burst through the door at 11:43, his hair disheveled and his expression thunderous, Ethan had Olivia stable, blood loss controlled, breathing steady, conscious and responsive. Reyes took in the scene with one sweeping glance, his eyes moving from the monitors to Ethan to Jennifer and back. "What do we have?" Jennifer rattled off vitals and treatment while Ethan stepped back, creating space for the doctor to work. His hands were stained with Olivia's blood, his uniform shirt speckled with it, but he barely noticed. The adrenaline was starting to ebb, leaving behind that hollow feeling he remembered from the war, that strange emptiness after intense action when the body didn't quite know how to downshift. Reyes was checking Olivia's pupils, palpating her abdomen, moving with the swift confidence of someone who'd pulled people back from the edge more times than he could count. "Vitals are stable. Better than I expected given the call I got." He glanced at Ethan. "You did this, just kept her steady until you got here." Reyes' expression shifted into something that looked like respect. "You saved her life." Ethan didn't respond, didn't need to. The doctor was already calling for a gurney to transfer Olivia to surgery, orders flying as the room mobilized around her. As they prepared to move her, Olivia's head turned searching. Her eyes found Ethan's one more time. Her lips shaped two words barely voiced, but clear enough. "Thank you." He nodded a slight acknowledgement, then stepped back into the hallway as they wheeled her away toward the surgical wing. The automatic doors swung shut behind them, and the emergency room settled back into its normal chaos, the crisis already becoming yesterday's crisis, another patient already being brought in to fill the empty exam room. Jennifer appeared beside him holding a towel. "You should clean up. Marcus will have questions about the uniform." "I'll tell him what happened." "You okay?" The question landed heavier than it should have. Ethan looked down at his hands, still shaking slightly from the adrenaline dump, and made himself nod. "Yeah, just need some air." He walked out through the ambulance bay into the cool night that felt sharp after the overheated interior. The city sprawled around the hospital in all directions, lights marking human presence in the dark. Somewhere out there, Grace was sleeping in her bed, safe and ignorant of the fact that her father had just done what he'd been trained to do, what he'd walked away from, what he'd thought he'd left behind for good. His phone buzzed, a text from the night supervisor at Grace's school, the overnight care program that lets single parents work night shifts without leaving their kids alone. "Grace is fine, did all her homework, watching a movie now. She asked when you'd be by." Ethan checked his watch. Just past midnight. He had 30 minutes on his break. He typed back a quick response and headed for his car. The elementary school was connected to the hospital through a community partnership, one of those programs designed to help medical workers with childcare. The overnight room was in the school's basement, converted from what used to be a bomb shelter in the 50s, but they'd done it up nice. Soft lighting, beanbag chairs, a TV, playing something animated and innocuous. Grace was curled up in one of the beanbags, her attention locked on the screen, but she spotted him immediately. Her face lit up with that pure joy that still had the power to make him feel like he'd accomplished something worthwhile just by existing. "Dad," she launched herself at him, and he caught her swinging her up, despite the regulations probably saying he shouldn't, because sometimes being a parent meant breaking minor rules for major moments. "Hey, kiddo, how was homework?" "Easy. Miss Martinez helped me with the word problems. There was one about trains that was tricky, but I figured it out." "That's my girl." She pulled back, studying his face with that unsettling perceptiveness kids developed when they grew up watching a parent carefully. "You look tired." "Long night." Did something happen? He thought about lying, giving her the standard, "everything's fine" reassurance parents used like shields. But he'd learned with Grace that honesty, carefully measured, built more trust than protective fiction. "I helped someone who was hurt. They're going to be okay." Her eyes went wide. "Like when you were in the army." "Something like that." "Did you save their life?" The question hung between them, weighted with implications he wasn't sure how to unpack. Grace knew the broad strokes of his military service, knew he'd been a medic, knew he'd helped people. But the specifics, the real cost of saving lives in combat, those stories stayed locked away where they couldn't touch her innocence. "I helped until the doctor got there. That's my job now. Help until the experts arrive." She seemed satisfied with that answer, nodding with the solemn certainty of someone who believed her father could do anything. "You're really good at helping people, Dad." "I try." "Miss Martinez says trying is the most important part." "Miss Martinez sounds smart." The overnight supervisor called from across the room, gentle but firm. Grace needed to settle down for the night, and Ethan needed to get back to his shift. He hugged his daughter one more time, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo and the indefinable smell that was just Grace memorizing the weight of her in his arms against the day when she'd be too big or too cool for dad hugs. "I love you, kiddo. See you at 6. "Love you too, Dad. Be safe." "Be safe." She said it every night like a prayer, like if she said it enough times, it would work as a charm against the universe's capacity for random cruelty. He kissed the top of her head and left before the emotion in his chest could manifest as tears he had no right to cry. Back at the hospital, the night continued its steady progression through small emergencies and long waits. Ethan resumed his position, checked his rounds, maintained his visibility without being intrusive. Someone brought him coffee around 2 a.m., one of the nurses whose name he could never remember, but who always smiled at him like he'd done something to deserve it. At 4:15, Jennifer found him during a quiet moment, her expression carefully neutral, in that way medical professionals use when delivering news they weren't sure how the recipient would take. "Heart's out of surgery, stable. Dr. Reyes says another 20 minutes and she probably wouldn't have made it. You bought her the time she needed." Ethan nodded, accepting the information without pride or false modesty, just simple acknowledgement of outcome. "That's good. She's someone important. CEO, billionaire, the whole thing. This is going to get attention once word gets out." "Not from me, it won't." Jennifer studied him for a moment, something like sadness crossing her face. "Most people would want credit for something like this." "I'm not most people." "No, you're really not." She left him to his rounds, and Ethan didn't think about it again until his shift ended at 6 a.m., and he was collecting Grace from the overnight program, driving home through streets, slowly filling with early morning commuters. Grace fell asleep in the back seat, exhausted from her own long night, and Ethan drove in silence, his mind blank with fatigue. At home, he carried Grace to her bed, tucked her in properly. This time closed the curtains against the rising sun. He showered, washing away the dried blood he'd missed earlier, watching it swirl down the drain and disappear. Changed into civilian clothes. Made breakfast he was too tired to eat. Sat at the small kitchen table and stared at nothing in particular, feeling the weight of accumulated nights pressing down on his shoulders. He should sleep. He had to be back at the hospital in 14 hours. But sleep meant dreams, and dreams meant the past had an opportunity to catch up with him. So instead, he sat and watched morning light creep across the kitchen floor, marking time until Grace woke up and needed him to be dad again. His phone buzzed, a text from Marcus. "Good work last night." Reyes submitted a commendation. "You earned it." Ethan deleted the text without responding. Commendations were for people who wanted recognition, who needed external validation to feel like their work mattered. He'd learned in the Army that the truest acts of service were the ones no one saw, the interventions that saved lives without leaving markers or monuments. He'd done his job. Someone lived who might have died. That was enough. Except it wasn't, not quite, because somewhere in the building he'd left hours ago, Olivia Hart was waking up in a private room, putting together fragments of memory, and asking questions that would eventually lead her to his name. And once she had his name, she'd have access to his file, his history, everything he'd worked to leave behind. That truth settled in his stomach like cold stone. Olivia woke the second time to sunlight and clarity. The fog had burned off, leaving her mind sharp and her body cataloging damage with merciless precision. Broken ribs, 3 of them. Torn ligaments in her right shoulder. Lacerations requiring 47 stitches. Concussion moderate. The list went on, each injury a data point in the larger equation of survival. She was alive, against odds that she was beginning to understand she was alive. The memory came back in pieces. Rain, her car hydroplaning, the sickening moment of lost control, impact, then pain and fear and a voice cutting through both. You're going to see the sunrise. She looked toward the window. Dawn light poured through expensive curtains, painting the private room in shades of gold and amber. True to the stranger's promise, she'd seen it. But the why of her survival remained a gap in her understanding, a variable she couldn't calculate. A nurse entered, different from the night shift, older, with the efficient demeanor of someone who'd been doing this job since before Olivia was born. Good morning, Miss Hart. How are you feeling? Like I was in a car accident. The nurse's lips twitched, almost smiling. Good. Awareness of circumstances is a positive sign. Dr. Reyes will be by shortly to discuss your recovery plan. Before he comes, I need to know something. Last night before the doctor arrived, there was a man, security uniform. He helped me. Ethan Ward. He works night security here. The name landed without fanfare, just another piece of information delivered in the nurse's matter-of-fact tone. Ethan Ward, security guard. The man who'd held her hand and promised sunrise as if promises meant something in a world built on contracts and leverage. Is he still here? His shift ends at 6. He's probably home by now. Home, the word conjured images. Olivia had no right to imagine domestic scenes belonging to a stranger whose life she'd intersected for 15 minutes of crisis. But something about those 15 minutes had burrowed under her skin, creating an itch she couldn't quite reach. I'd like to thank him properly. Could someone make sure he knows I'm asking about him? The nurse made a note on her tablet, non-committal. I'll pass the message along. After the nurse left, Olivia's assistant, Marcus, arrived, armed with her laptop tablet phone and an expression that telegraphed crisis management from across the room. He was good at his job, anticipating needs before she voiced them, but right now his efficiency felt like an intrusion on thoughts she hadn't finished thinking. Miss Hart, thank God you're okay. He set up her mobile office on the rolling table, already talking through the backlog. The board is asking questions. Media has the story, but details are limited. We've got the PR team crafting a statement. What do you want me to tell them, son? Olivia looked at her phone, 47 missed calls, 213 emails, numbers that would have sent her into overdrive yesterday. Today they felt distant, less urgent than the throb in her ribs and the echo of a stranger's voice in her memory. Tell them I'm recovering. Medical team handled everything professionally. No further comment. The press is asking who saved you. Apparently someone mentioned a security guard before the official statement went out. The question made Olivia's chest tighten in a way that had nothing to do with broken ribs. She thought about Ethan's face, the calm certainty in his eyes, the way he'd held her hand like it mattered that she wasn't alone. No names, no unnecessary attention. We don't turn emergency medical response into a media circus. Marcus nodded, already typing notes. Understood. I'll handle it. He left 30 minutes later, taking the noise of her professional life with him, leaving Olivia alone with sunlight and questions she had no framework for answering. Why did it matter that she didn't know anything about the man who'd saved her? Why did the phrase security guard feel wrong? Incomplete, like a label that missed the essential truth of what she'd witnessed. She told herself it was gratitude, simple acknowledgement of debt. But the feeling in her chest wasn't simple, and it certainly wasn't about owing anyone anything. Dr. Reyes came by mid-morning, checking her charts, explaining recovery timelines and physical therapy requirements, with the brisk professionalism of someone who'd delivered this speech 1,000 times. He was good at his job, she could tell, the kind of good that came from caring about outcomes more than credit. "You're lucky," he said, closing in her chart. "Another 20 minutes and I don't think we could have stabilized you in time." And the security guard, Ethan, the nurse said he kept me stable. Reyes's expression shifted into something warmer. More than stable. He did everything right. Combat medic training, I'd guess. Textbook response under pressure. You were in good hands. Combat medic. The phrase added weight to her incomplete picture of Ethan Ward filling in gaps while creating new questions. Why was a combat medic working security? What story had brought him from battlefield medicine to night shifts at a civilian hospital? Is he always here, night shift? Far as I know, been here about 4 years, maybe 5. Keeps to himself mostly, but everyone likes him. Good man. After Reyes left, Olivia tried to focus on email on the accumulated work that never stopped accumulating, regardless of personal emergency. But her attention kept drifting to the window to the sunrise she'd been promised, and delivered to the understanding that her survival had hinged on the presence of one specific person at one specific moment. The odds of that should have comforted her. Instead, it felt like owing someone a debt she had no way to repay. By early afternoon, she was cleared for visitors beyond medical staff. Board members came first, bringing flowers and concern that felt performative, strategic shows of solidarity that had more to do with stock prices than genuine care. She tolerated their visits, gave them reassurances about her recovery timeline and return to work schedule, watched them calculate how her absence would impact quarterly targets. When they finally left, she felt exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with her injuries. Her phone buzzed, a text from her younger sister, brief and pointed. "Heard you almost died. Glad you didn't. Call me when you're ready to talk about why you were working late enough to crash on the way home." Olivia didn't call. Her sister understood her too well, would see through any deflection straight to the hollow truth beneath. She wasn't ready for that conversation yet. Wasn't ready to admit that she'd been working late because work was the only thing she had that felt like winning, and she needed to feel like she was winning at something. Evening came. The nurses changed shifts. Olivia picked at dinner she didn't want, watched television she couldn't follow, waited for something she couldn't name. Around 7 p.m., her door opened and she looked it up, expecting another nurse, another doctor, another round of vitals and platitudes. Instead, she saw him. Ethan Ward looked different, out of immediate crisis, less like an action hero, and more like what he apparently was, a regular man in a security uniform approaching middle age, with tired eyes and the kind of face that had seen trouble and decided to keep going anyway. He stopped just inside the doorway, clearly uncomfortable with the intrusion, his hand still on the door handle like he was ready to retreat. "Miss Hart, I heard you were asking about me." His voice was the same, that calm depth that had cut through her panic, but now it carried uncertainty. Wariness, the tone of someone who'd been summoned but wasn't sure why. Olivia sat up straighter, ignoring the protest from her ribs. "I wanted to thank you for last night. Just doing my job. I don't think security guards are trained in emergency medical response." A muscle twitched in his jaw. "I've got some medical background. It came in useful." Combat medic. She watched his reaction, saw the brief flash of surprise followed by resignation. "Dr. Reyes mentioned it. That was a long time ago. Not so long that you've forgotten how to save lives." Ethan shifted his weight, clearly wanting this conversation to end, but too polite or too stubborn to just walk away. "I'm glad you're recovering. If there's nothing else, why security?" The question left her mouth before she'd fully formed it, too blunt, too personal, the kind of directness that served her well in boardrooms, but probably wasn't appropriate here. "With your training, your experience, why work night security at a hospital?" His expression closed down, walls going up so fast she could almost hear them lock into place. Everyone's got their reasons for the choices they make. That's not an answer. It's the only one you're getting. The words weren't harsh, but they carried finality, a line drawn that she'd crossed without permission. Olivia felt something twist in her chest, part embarrassment, part frustration, part something else she couldn't name. "I apologize. That was inappropriate." Ethan's shoulders relaxed slightly. "Forget it. You've had a rough couple days. People ask weird questions after trauma." He turned to leave, and Olivia found herself speaking again, words tumbling out with uncharacteristic lack of filter. I remember what you said about the sunrise. You promised I'd see it. He paused, looked back. Did you echo him? Yes. Then I kept my promise. Something in his tone made her feel small, made her aware of how much space she took up in the world and how little space he seemed to need. She wanted to say something else to bridge the gap between them, but he was already moving toward the door. Take care of yourself, Miss Hart. Follow the doctor's orders. You'll be back to running your empire in no time. The door closed behind him, and Olivia was alone again, with sunlight fading toward evening and a feeling in her chest that might have been regret or might have been relief. She'd said thank you. The debt was acknowledged. There was no reason for their paths to cross again. That truth should have been comforting. Instead, it felt like losing something she'd never actually held. Ethan made it halfway down the hallway before his hands started shaking. Not the adrenaline tremors from last night, but something deeper, the kind of shaking that came from walking too close to edges he'd spent 5 years avoiding. She'd looked at him like he was something more than a security guard, like his past mattered, like the choices he'd made had story and weight instead of being simple necessity. He hated that look, hated the way it made him feel exposed, visible, like someone had peeled back carefully constructed layers to reveal everything he'd tried to bury. He took the stairs down instead of the elevator, needing the physical movement to burn off the restless energy. By the time he reached the ground floor, his breathing was steady again, his hands quiet. Good. He had a shift to finish and a daughter to pick up and a life to maintain that didn't include complicated gratitude from billionaire CEOs who'd briefly needed saving. The rest of the week passed in blessed routine. Grace started a new art project at school, something involving tissue paper and glue that she described in exhaustive detail every morning over breakfast. The hospital had its usual parade of emergencies and non-emergencies, and Ethan worked his shifts with the same quiet competence that had defined the last 4 years. He didn't see Olivia Hart again. Didn't expect to. She'd been discharged 2 days after their conversation, surrounded by private security and medical staff, the kind of exit that came with money and status. He'd been on his rounds when she left, deliberately timing his route to avoid the main entrance. Then Friday morning, walking Grace to her classroom before his own shift ended, he passed the new computer lab they'd been building all semester. Grace stopped dead, her hand slipping from his as she stared through the glass wall at rows of brand new tablets and computers still wrapped in plastic. Dad, look. I see it, kiddo. Miss Martinez said we'd have new equipment by next month, but I didn't think it would be this nice. Grace pressed her face against the glass, breath fogging the surface. We're going to learn coding, real coding, like what makes apps work. A teacher Ethan recognized from parent nights came over, smiling at Grace's enthusiasm. Exciting, isn't it? We got a very generous donation from Hart Foundation. They're equipping computer labs in 10 schools across the city. Hart Foundation. The words landed in Ethan's chest like stones. Grace was still talking, excited about coding lessons and technology, but Ethan barely heard her. His mind was calculating, connecting dots he didn't want connected. Hart Foundation, Olivia Hart. A donation announced days after a car accident, after a private conversation about gratitude and debt. This wasn't coincidence. This was payment obligation discharged through philanthropy, and the fact that it helped his daughter's school didn't change the bitter taste it left in his mouth. He didn't mention it to Grace, didn't tell her the connection. What would be the point? The equipment was here, regardless of his feelings about how it arrived. Kids would benefit. That should be enough to outweigh any personal discomfort. But walking home later, watching sunrise paint the city in shades of amber and gold, he couldn't shake the feeling that Olivia Hart had looked at the debt between them and decided to pay it without asking whether he wanted payment at all. Later that afternoon, after he'd slept and eaten and helped Grace with homework, his phone rang with a number he didn't recognize. He almost let it go to voicemail, but something made him answer. This is Ethan. Mr. Ward, this is Marcus Chen from Hart Foundation. I'm calling on behalf of Miss Hart. Ethan's grip tightened on the phone. I don't think we have anything to discuss. Miss Hart wanted to extend an invitation. Hart Foundation is hosting a charity gala next month at St. Haven Hospital. It's our annual fundraiser for emergency care services. She thought you might like to attend, given your work at the hospital. I work security, Mr. Chen. Not exactly gala material. Miss Hart was quite specific that you be invited. The foundation is pledging $5 million toward expanding emergency services. It seemed appropriate that you be present. $5 million. Ethan closed his eyes, recognizing the magnitude the way money could be wielded, like precision instruments when you had enough of it. This wasn't just about paying a debt. This was about making a statement, creating visibility, turning a private moment of crisis into public philanthropy. Tell Miss Hart I appreciate the invitation, but I'll be working that night. Actually, you're scheduled to work security for the event. The hospital's providing coverage. You'd be there anyway. Trapped by logistics and politeness, Ethan couldn't think of another reason to decline that wouldn't sound churlish or ungrateful. The silence stretched long enough that Marcus filled it with practiced ease. I'll send the details to your email, black tie optional. We hope to see you there. The call ended before Ethan could form another objection. He stood in his small kitchen, phone still in his hand, feeling the careful walls of his quiet life beginning to develop cracks. Grace appeared in his doorway holding up a drawing she'd been working on. Dad, look what I made. The picture showed two figures, one tall, one small, holding hands under a sun drawn with rays like straight lines. Simple, pure, untouched by complications. It's beautiful, sweetheart. It's us. I'm going to give it to Miss Martinez to put on the wall. Ethan crouched down to her level, studying the crayon drawing with the seriousness it deserved. She's going to love it. Dad, Grace's expression shifted to that concerned focus she got when she was trying to understand something beyond her years. Are you okay? You look sad. I'm fine, kiddo, just tired. You're always tired. Maybe you should sleep more. Maybe I should. He pulled her into a hug, breathing in the strawberry shampoo scent of her hair, grounding himself in this simple truth. He had a daughter who loved him, a job that paid the bills, a life that worked, even if it didn't soar. Olivia Hart and her charitable galas and her $5 million pledges existed in a different stratosphere, one that had briefly intersected with his but would drift away again once the spectacle was over. He just needed to get through the next month, work the event, fade back into the shadows, let the world forget he'd ever stepped into the light. The problem was, Olivia Hart didn't seem inclined to forget. Over the next 3 weeks, reminders kept appearing in subtle ways. An upgraded break room at the hospital funded by Hart Foundation, new equipment in the ER donated by Hart Foundation, a scholarship program for children of hospital staff, guess who? Each announcement came with press releases and photo opportunities, Olivia, in her element, commanding attention, making things happen through sheer force of will and capital. Ethan watched from the margins, recognizing the strategy. She was building something, creating a narrative where her near-death experience led to increased philanthropy transformation through crisis. It was smart. It was effective. It made him feel like a prop in someone else's story. The night of the gala arrived cold and clear, early November weather that promised winter without quite delivering it yet. Ethan arrived at the hospital 2 hours early to coordinate security details with Marcus and the event planners who transformed the main atrium into something that looked more like a palace than a medical facility. Chandeliers hung from the ceiling, temporary but expensive. Round tables filled the space, each one decorated with flower arrangements that probably cost more than Ethan's monthly rent. A stage had been erected at the far end, complete with podium and microphone ready for speeches and announcements, and all the theatrical performance that came with wealth intersecting with charity. Ethan's job was simple: stay visible, watch for problems, make sure guests felt safe and important people didn't get harassed. Standard security work elevated by formal setting and high-profile attendance. Marcus handed him a revised floor plan. We've got 3 exit points all monitored. Guest list is locked down, no walk-ins. VIPs get escorted to their tables. You're covering the north entrance and main floor. Questions? None. You clean up nice ward. Almost didn't recognize you without the regular uniform. Ethan glanced down at his security blacks pressed to military standard badge polished. Same job, different packaging. He didn't bother responding to the compliment. Guests started arriving at 7. Politicians in suits that cost more than cars. Doctors who divided their time between healing and fundraising. Business executives who saw philanthropy as networking with tax benefits. They flooded through security checks with the impatient tolerance of people used to expedited everything, and Ethan watched them flow into the transformed atrium like birds in expensive plumage. At 7:45, Olivia Hart arrived. She entered through the main doors alone, no entourage, no handlers, just her in a midnight blue gown that probably cost more than Ethan's car, and her entire being radiating the kind of confidence that came from owning rooms before you walked into them. Her eyes swept the space professional assessment, and for a brief moment they landed on Ethan standing near the north wall. Recognition flickered across her face. She started to move in his direction, but someone intercepted her, another CEO or politician or whoever mattered enough to demand her attention. She was pulled into conversation into the performance of the evening, and Ethan was grateful for the interruption. He didn't need to talk to her, didn't want to. The debt had been paid in computer labs and equipment donations, and this entire spectacle of charitable giving. They were even. They were done. The gala proceeded with choreographed precision. Speeches from hospital administrators, testimonials from patients, a video presentation about the impact of Heart Foundation donations complete with emotional music and carefully edited footage. Ethan watched from his position, maintaining professional distance, his attention split between crowd management and the figure on stage. Olivia spoke last, her voice carrying through the sound system with practiced ease. She talked about the importance of emergency care, about how seconds could mean the difference between life and death, about the privilege of being able to give back to the community that had saved her. It was a good speech. It moved people. Ethan could see it in their faces, the way they leaned forward, engaged, believing in the narrative she was weaving. Then the lights flickered. Once, twice. The crowd murmured, uncertain. Before anyone could react, the fire alarms screamed to life, sounds sharp enough to hurt ears. Confusion rippled through the atrium, people looking around, looking to each other, looking for authority to tell them what to do. Ethan was already moving his radio, crackling with overlapping voices, trying to determine if this was real emergency or false alarm. He pushed through the crowd, not running but moving with purpose, scanning for smoke, for panic, for any sign of actual danger. Near the west side of the room, he saw it. An elderly man, 70 maybe, collapsed on the floor. His face had that bluish tint Ethan recognized immediately. Not breathing. Cardiac arrest. The crowd was backing away, creating a circle of paralyzed witnesses. Someone was screaming for a doctor. Ethan dropped to his knees beside the man, checking for pulse, finding nothing. His training engaged like a switch being thrown. "Someone call 911. Now." He tilted the man's head back, checked the airway, started chest compressions. 30 pumps, hard and fast, the way he'd done 100 times in training and too many times for real. 2 rescue breaths. Repeat. Time compressed. He was aware of voices around him, people talking, but they existed in a different space than the rhythm he was locked into. Compressions. Breaths. Compressions. Breaths. Counting in his head, monitoring the man's color, willing the heart to restart. 15 seconds. 30. 45. Come on. Come on. The man gasped, coughed, his eyes fluttering open. Ethan kept him steady, checking vitals by touch and observation, making sure the airway stayed clear. "Sir, stay still. Help is coming. You're okay now." The man's hand gripped Ethan's sleeve, weak but present. His lips moved, forming words Ethan couldn't hear over the alarm that was finally shutting off. But he understood the meaning well enough. Paramedics arrived moments later, taking over with equipment and expertise. Ethan stood up, backing away, letting them work. His knees were sore from the hard floor, his hands aching from compressions, but the familiar post-action clarity was already settling over him. He'd done his job. Someone who wasn't breathing was breathing again. That was enough. Except when he looked up, he found Olivia Hart standing at the edge of the dispersing crowd, staring at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Her hands were clasped in front of her knuckles, white, and something in her face had cracked open, revealing vulnerability she probably hadn't meant to show. Their eyes met across 15 feet of expensive carpet, and Ethan saw the moment she understood. Saw her piece it together, the kind of person he was, the training he carried, the way he moved through emergencies, like other people moved through routine. He turned away, heading back to his post, but the damage was done. Olivia Hart now knew something about him he'd spent 5 years trying to hide in plain sight. He wasn't just a security guard who'd gotten lucky once. He was someone who'd been trained to save lives, who still had the instinct and skill, who couldn't turn off that part of himself even when it meant stepping into visibility he didn't want. The gala continued after the emergency, but the energy had shifted. People talked about what they'd witnessed, the drama of near death, an intervention turning crisis into conversation piece. Ethan finished his shift, filed his report, and left before the event officially ended. At home, Grace was already asleep, curled up in her bed with the blanket kicked off again. He tucked her in, then sat in his kitchen with a cup of coffee he didn't drink, staring at nothing, feeling the weight of recognition settling on his shoulders. He'd saved 2 lives in front of Olivia Hart. Twice she'd witnessed him do what he'd been trained to do. And now she had questions he couldn't answer and attention he couldn't deflect. His phone buzzed, a text from a number he now recognized as Marcus Chen. "Miss Hart would like to speak with you. When would be convenient?" Ethan deleted the text without responding. There was nothing convenient about any of this. 3 days later, sitting in the hospital's HR office because they'd asked nicely, and he couldn't think of a reason to refuse, Ethan learned exactly how much Olivia Hart's curiosity had cost him. The HR manager, a middle-aged woman named Sandra, who'd always been pleasant, if slightly distant, pushed a file across the desk toward him. "Mr. Ward, we've received a request from Hart Foundation for your personnel file." Ethan's chest tightened. "What kind of request?" "They're considering you for a position. Safety and medical preparedness advisor. Part-time, flexible hours, substantial pay increase." Sandra's expression suggested she thought he should be excited about this opportunity. "Miss Hart specifically requested your file to review your qualifications." "I didn't apply for any position." "I understand that, but given your background and recent performance during the gala incident, it's not surprising they'd want to recruit you." Ethan stared at the file, recognizing what it contained. His work history, his military service record, his commendations. Everything he tried to leave behind, summarized in documents that reduced complicated years into bullet points and dates. "I need to think about it." "Of course. But Mr. Ward, this is an exceptional opportunity. The salary alone—" "I said I need to think about it." Sandra's expression cooled slightly, professional courtesy strained by his lack of appropriate gratitude. She pulled the file back across the desk. "Let me know your decision by end of week. Hart Foundation needs to fill the position by month's end." Ethan left the HR office feeling like he'd been maneuvered into a corner. Olivia Hart wasn't asking. She was creating circumstances where refusing would be more complicated than accepting, where his own best interests aligned with her apparent need to, what, repay a debt. Create a convenient narrative. Collect people the way she collected companies and market share. That evening, he found a manila envelope slipped under his apartment door. Inside, a handwritten letter on expensive stationery. The handwriting was precise, controlled the kind of penmanship that suggested Catholic school or old money or both. Ethan read it standing in his doorway, Grace playing in her room, unaware of the complications spreading through her father's carefully managed life. "Ethan, you saved me twice. Once from death, once from myself. I don't know how to repay that. Maybe I never can. But I'm trying to be better because of you. Thank you for seeing me even when I couldn't see myself." Olivia, he read it 3 times, searching for manipulation, for hidden agenda, for anything that would let him dismiss it as just another power play from someone who used influence as currency. But the words felt genuine, raw, in a way that didn't match the polished CEO who commanded stages and boardrooms. She was trying to be better. Because of him. Ethan folded the letter carefully, put it in his pocket, and stood in his small apartment, feeling the careful walls of his life developing cracks he couldn't repair. Grace appeared in the hallway clutching a book. "Dad, will you read to me?" "Of course, kiddo." He followed his daughter to her room, sat on the edge of her bed, and read about dragons and princesses and heroes who saved kingdoms. Grace listened with rapt attention, asking questions about why the dragon was lonely and whether the princess might actually want to be friends with it instead of waiting for rescue. After she fell asleep, Ethan stood at her window looking out at the city lights, scattered across darkness like fallen stars. Somewhere out there, Olivia Hart was in her penthouse or office, or wherever billionaires went when they weren't performing philanthropy, and she'd looked at him and seen something worth saving in return. The thought terrified him more than any firefight he'd survived. Because in war, you knew who the enemy was, knew what winning looked like, knew that survival was the only objective that mattered. But this, whatever this was, had no clear lines, no obvious strategy. Just 2 people whose lives had intersected through accident and crisis, who now owed each other debts that maybe couldn't be repaid in money or opportunities or handwritten letters. He pulled the letter from his pocket, read it one more time in the darkness of his daughter's room. Thank you for seeing me. The problem was he had seen her. In that moment when she gripped his hand and whispered, please just make it fast, he'd seen past the CEO, past the billionaire, past all the armor of success and achievement, to the human underneath who was just scared of dying alone. And now she'd seen him twice doing what he was trained to do, being who he'd tried to stop being. They'd seen each other's truth. That kind of seeing came with consequences he wasn't sure either of them was ready to handle. Ethan folded the letter again, put it in his bedside drawer where Grace wouldn't find it, and lay down in his own bed to not sleep for the next few hours. Outside, the city hummed its constant song, and somewhere in that noise, the future was arranging itself into shapes he couldn't yet see, but could already feel pressing against the borders of his carefully controlled present. Tomorrow, he'd have to make a decision about Hart Foundation's offer. Tomorrow, he'd have to figure out how to maintain his boundaries while acknowledging that Olivia Hart had somehow become more than just another person he'd saved. But tonight, he just lay in darkness and listened to his daughter breathe in the next room and tried to remember why he'd chosen this quiet life over the loud purpose of his past. The answer had always been Grace, protecting her, being there for her, making sure she grew up with a father who came home every night instead of one who might not come home at all. That answer hadn't changed, but somewhere beneath it, in places he didn't want to examine too closely, a new question was forming. What if being there for Grace meant being more than just present? What if it meant showing her that helping people wasn't something you outgrew or left behind, but something you carried forward into whatever life gave you next? He didn't have an answer yet. The sunrise would come in a few hours, same as it always did, and he'd make breakfast for Grace and drive her to school and go to work and keep doing what he'd been doing. Unless he didn't. Unless he took the risk of stepping back into the kind of purpose that had once defined him, even if it meant complications and visibility, in Olivia Hart's unsettling gratitude. The choice sat in his chest like an unexploded ordnance waiting for him to decide whether to defuse it or let it detonate. Dawn arrived with cold clarity. Ethan made breakfast, helped Grace get ready for school, drove through morning traffic that moved like sluggish water. At the elementary school drop-off, Grace kissed his cheek and ran toward her classroom backpack, bouncing already calling to friends. He watched her disappear through the doors, this small person who trusted him completely to make the right choices for both of them. Then he pulled out his phone and typed a message to Sandra in HR. Tell Hart Foundation I'll meet with them, but I'm not promising anything. He hit send before he could reconsider, then drove to the hospital for his shift, feeling like he'd just stepped off a cliff and was still waiting to find out whether he'd sprout wings or hit bottom. The answer he suspected was going to be complicated. The Hart Foundation offices occupied 3 floors of downtown glass and steel, the kind of building that reflected clouds and ambition in equal measure. Ethan arrived 15 minutes early because the military had trained punctuality into his DNA, then sat in his truck for 10 of those minutes, second-guessing every decision that had led him to this parking garage. Grace's voice echoed in his memory from breakfast that morning, innocent and piercing. Dad, why do you look scared? You're never scared. He'd told her he wasn't scared, just nervous about a meeting. She'd hugged him and said he was the bravest person she knew, which made lying to her feel like swallowing glass. The lobby was all marble and minimalist furniture designed to make visitors feel either intimidated or inspired depending on their net worth. Ethan gave his name to the receptionist, who smiled with professional warmth and directed him to the elevators. 15th floor, corner office. Miss Hart was expecting him. The elevator rose smooth and silent numbers climbing with the kind of efficiency that came from German engineering and American capital. When the doors opened, Marcus Chen was waiting tablet in hand, expression carefully neutral. Mr. Ward, thank you for coming. Miss Hart is finishing a call. Can I get you coffee, water, anything? I'm fine. Marcus led him through an open floor plan where young professionals hunched over computers, their casual dress and intense focus suggesting a workplace that valued output over appearance. But everything was expensive in that understated way wealth had perfected, from the ergonomic chairs to the art on the walls that probably cost more than Ethan's annual salary. The corner office had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, and Olivia Hart stood with her back to the door phone pressed to her ear, her voice carrying the kind of authority that made disagreement feel pointless. I don't care what the board thinks is prudent, David. We're moving forward with the community clinic initiative. Yes, I'm aware of the optics. That's exactly why we're doing it. She paused, listening. Tell them I'll address their concerns at Thursday's meeting. If they want to challenge me, they can do it to my face. She ended the call and turned her expression shifting from boardroom steel to something softer when she saw Ethan. Not quite a smile, but acknowledgement that carried weight. Ethan, I'm glad you came. The office felt too small suddenly, despite being larger than Ethan's entire apartment. He stayed near the door, maintaining distance, his hands loose at his sides in a posture that was either casual or ready depending on need. Your assistant said this was about a job offer. It is, but first I owe you a proper apology. What I said in the hospital about keeping things quiet, about not wanting attention. Her voice caught just barely enough to make it real. I was wrong. I was trying to protect something that didn't need protecting, and in the process I disrespected what you did for me. Ethan shifted his weight, uncomfortable with the sincerity, with the vulnerability she was offering, like a gift he hadn't asked for. You were in shock. People say things. That's generous, more generous than I deserve. She moved to her desk, picked up a folder, held it without opening it. After the gala, after I saw you save that man, I realized I didn't know anything about you. So I looked. I'm not apologizing for that because my foundation hires people and I need to know who they are. But what I found, she stopped, and when she continued, her voice had changed, stripped of corporate polish. You were awarded the Silver Cross for valor. You ran through enemy fire 6 times to evacuate wounded soldiers. You performed field surgery under conditions that would have broken most trained surgeons. And then you just stopped. Left the army, took a security job. Why? The question hung between them, and Ethan felt the familiar tightness in his chest, the resistance to explaining himself to someone who couldn't possibly understand. My daughter needed a father who came home. That's the only reason that matters. Olivia's expression shifted, something like recognition flickering across her face. She set the folder down, leaned against her desk, suddenly less CEO and more human. Grace, 8 years old, 3rd grade. Mother passed away 5 years ago in a car accident. Hearing Grace's name from Olivia's mouth felt like an intrusion, like private spaces being measured and cataloged. Ethan's jaw tightened. You've done your research. I have. And what I learned is that you're exactly the kind of person Heart Foundation needs. Someone who understands emergency response from the ground level. Someone who can design protocols that actually work when seconds matter. She pulled a document from the folder, held it out. Safety and Medical Preparedness Advisor. Part-time, 20 hours a week. Flexible schedule. You'd work with hospitals, first responders, community clinics, design training programs, consult on equipment purchases, make sure other people have the tools to do what you did. Ethan took the document, scanned it without really reading. The salary number at the bottom made his stomach clench. It was more than he made in a year as security for half the hours. This feels like charity. It's not. It's me recognizing that talent and training shouldn't be wasted on overnight patrols when it could be saving lives systemically. Her voice carried conviction, the kind that came from believing your own narrative. You saved me. You saved that man at the gala. How many more people could you save if you were building the systems instead of just responding to emergencies? The logic was sound, the opportunity was legitimate. But something in Ethan's gut twisted with resistance he couldn't quite name. I need to think about it. Of course, take the document, talk to Grace, talk to whoever you need to talk to. Olivia's expression softened. But Ethan understands something. This isn't about me feeling guilty or trying to buy my way out of debt. This is about me trying to be the kind of person who sees value and doesn't waste it. You taught me that. In about 15 minutes of crisis, you taught me more about leadership than 10 years in business school. The words should have felt manipulative, calculated to appeal to his sense of purpose. Instead, they landed with uncomfortable accuracy, hitting pressure points he'd been protecting for 5 years. He folded the document, slid it into his jacket pocket. I'll let you know by end of week. Walking out of Heart Foundation offices, Ethan felt like he'd survived an interrogation disguised as opportunity. The city sprawled below as the elevator descended, all those lives moving through their own complications. And somewhere in the middle of it, his daughter sat in a classroom, learning fractions, unaware that her father's carefully constructed world was developing fault lines. His phone rang before he reached his truck. Unknown number, but instinct made him answer. "Mr. Ward, this is Principal Davis from Oakwood Elementary. We need you to come to the school. There's been an incident involving Grace." The drive took 12 minutes that felt like hours. Every stoplight was personal offense, every slow driver an obstacle between him and his daughter. By the time he reached the school, his hands were white-knuckled on the steering wheel, his heart rate elevated past anything healthy. Principal Davis met him in the front office, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes that currently carried concern. "Grace is fine physically, but there was an altercation at lunch. Another student made comments about," she paused, choosing words carefully, "about economic status." Grace responded verbally, and things escalated. "No one was hurt, but we needed to call you." Ethan followed her down familiar hallways, past construction paper artwork and motivational posters, to a small conference room where Grace sat in a chair too big for her eyes, red from crying, but jaw set in stubborn defiance, he recognized from his own reflection. "Dad?" She launched herself at him, and he caught her, held her, while she shook with residual emotion. Over her head, he saw the principal and another parent, a woman in expensive athleisure who radiated entitled concern. "My son didn't mean anything by it. He was just making an observation about the differences between their circumstances." Ethan felt heat rise in his chest, the kind that preceded violence in his previous life, but now had nowhere to go except into carefully controlled words. "What exactly did your son observe?" The woman shifted uncomfortably. "He mentioned that Grace's clothes were from discount stores and that her father worked as a security guard, not a real professional. Children notice these things." "He said you were poor." Grace's voice was muffled against Ethan's shoulder, but clear enough. "He said I didn't belong in the new computer lab because kids like me don't become coders. And I told him my dad was a hero, and he laughed." The woman's expression suggested she found Grace's characterization dramatic. Ethan set his daughter down, gently crouched to her eye level. "Did you hit him?" "No, I just said his dad probably never saved anyone's life, and money doesn't make you better than other people." Grace's chin trembled. "But I wanted to hit him. I was really mad." "Being mad is okay. Violence isn't. You did the right thing." Principal Davis cleared her throat. "We've addressed the situation with both students, but Mr. Ward, I want you to know that Grace's response was appropriate given the provocation. She's a good kid. This isn't a reflection on her or your parenting." The other parent made a sound that suggested disagreement, but one look from Ethan shut down whatever objection she'd been forming. He'd perfected that look in combat zones, the one that made people reconsider their next words very carefully. "My son shouldn't have to apologize for stating facts." Perhaps if some families taught their children realistic expectations about social mobility, perhaps if some families taught their children basic human decency, we wouldn't be having this conversation. The woman's face flushed. Principal Davis stepped between them, diplomatic but firm. "I think we're done here. Both children have been spoken to. Let's all move forward constructively." Outside, walking Grace to his truck, Ethan felt rage and helplessness warring in his chest. He'd left the military to give his daughter stability, safety, a childhood unmarked by the violence he'd lived in. But poverty was its own kind of violence, slower, quieter, just as damaging. "Dad, are we poor?" The question hit harder than any wound he'd taken overseas. He opened the truck door, lifted Grace into her booster seat, bought himself seconds to formulate an answer that was honest without being crushing. "We have everything we need, a home, food, each other. Some people have more money than us. That doesn't make them better. It just makes them richer. But that boy's dad drives a Tesla and lives in a big house, and they went to Disney World last month." Grace's voice carried confusion rather than envy. "Why don't we have those things?" "Because I chose a job that lets me be there for you. Wake you up for school, put you to bed, help with homework. Some parents choose money. I chose you. That's not wrong, it's just different." Grace processed this, her 8-year-old brain working through concepts that adults spent lifetimes struggling with. "I'm glad you chose me, even if it means Tommy Prescott thinks I'm poor." Ethan kissed the top of her head, buckled her in, tried to ignore the way his heart was splintering in his chest. That evening, after Grace was asleep, Ethan sat at his kitchen table with Hart Foundation's job offer spread in front of him. The salary number stared back like an accusation. With that money, Grace could have new clothes, real vacations, tutoring if she needed it. She could have the kind of childhood where other kids didn't use poverty as a weapon. His phone buzzed, a text from an unfamiliar number. Mr. Ward, this is Olivia Hart. Marcus gave me your personal number. I hope that's not overstepping. I heard about what happened at Grace's school. If there's anything I can do, Ethan stared at the message, anger and gratitude mixing into something toxic. How did she know? Was Hart Foundation monitoring his daughter's school now? Was this what accepting their money meant, surrendering privacy along with pride? He typed a response, deleted it. Typed another, deleted that too. Finally settled on something neutral. How did you hear about it? The response came quickly. Principal Davis called. Hart Foundation funds the computer lab program, so I'm on the school board distribution list. I saw the incident report. I'm sorry Grace had to deal with that. Kids can be cruel. Ethan's hands tightened around the phone. Everything connected back to Olivia Hart somehow. The computer lab, the job offer, even his daughter's humiliation at lunch. Not through malice, but through the sheer gravitational pull of wealth and influence reshaping the world around it. Is this what working for you means? Your foundation everywhere in my life. A longer pause before the reply came. No, it means I care about outcomes, and sometimes that means paying attention to details other people miss. But if my attention feels invasive, I'll back off. I just wanted you to know that Grace did nothing wrong, and that boys' parents are going to receive a very direct conversation about bullying from the school board. His father sits on it too, and he's about to learn that money doesn't shield children from consequences. Despite himself, Ethan felt something loosen in his chest. Olivia Hart was using her influence to protect Grace, which should have felt patronizing, but instead felt like solidarity. Thank you, she didn't deserve that. Another text came through, neither did you. What that parent said about realistic expectations and social mobility, that's code for know your place. I've heard it my whole career. People who inherit wealth love telling self-made people where they belong. The answer is wherever we damn well decide to be. Ethan found himself almost smiling. There was fire in those words, the kind that came from personal experience with the exact hierarchies she was describing. You're self-made. I thought Hart was a family name. It is. My great-grandfather built the foundation. My grandfather lost most of it through bad investments. My father spent his life trying to rebuild it and died before he succeeded. I inherited debt and a name. Everything else I built from scratch. So yes, I'm self-made, and I'm tired of people who mistake inherited comfort for earned achievement. The conversation was veering into territory Ethan hadn't anticipated, genuine exchange instead of polite distance. He should have ended it, maintained boundaries, kept the relationship professional. Instead, he kept typing. Grace asked me if we're poor. I didn't know how to answer without making her feel like I'd failed her. You haven't failed her. You chose presence over profit. That's not failure, it's priority. But Ethan, here's the thing, you don't have to choose anymore. You can be present and provide. That's what this job offer means. Stop punishing yourself for circumstances and start leveraging the skills you have to build something better. The words hit like targeted strikes, each one finding weaknesses in his defenses. Olivia Hart understood something about him that he'd barely acknowledged to himself. He wasn't staying in security out of necessity anymore. He was staying because he believed he deserved the struggle, because ease felt like betrayal of everyone who hadn't made it home from war. His phone rang, Olivia not texting anymore, but calling, her voice carrying through the speaker with unexpected warmth. I'm overstepping. I can hear myself doing it, and I can't seem to stop. It's a control issue. I like fixing problems, and you're presenting as a problem that needs fixing, which is deeply condescending, and I apologize. Ethan almost laughed, caught off guard by the self-awareness. You're not wrong, though, about the punishment thing. No, I'm not wrong, but I'm also not qualified to psychoanalyze your relationship with sacrifice and survival guilt. I just know opportunity when I see it, and you're wasting yourself on patrols when you could be changing systems. She paused, and her voice softened. Take the job, Ethan. Do it for Grace if you won't do it for yourself. Show her that her father's value isn't measured in paychecks or zip codes, but in the difference he makes when he stops hiding his light. I'm not hiding. You're working night security with combat medic training and a Silver Cross for valor. That's not hiding, that's burial. The accuracy of it stole his breath. Before he could respond, Olivia continued her tone, shifting to something more vulnerable. I know what it's like to feel like you don't deserve good things, to sabotage yourself because success feels like tempting fate. But hiding doesn't honor the people we've lost. Living does. Building does. Showing up in our power does. Who did you lose? Silence stretched long enough that Ethan thought she'd hung up. Then quietly, my father. To a heart attack at 53, working himself to death, trying to restore something that didn't matter as much as he thought it did. I watched him sacrifice everything for legacy, and then I spent 10 years doing the same thing before a car accident made me realize I was heading for the same ending. So no, this isn't charity. This is me trying to save someone else from the mistake I almost made. The mistake my father did make. Ethan closed his eyes, leaning back in his kitchen chair, feeling the walls between them crumbling faster than he could rebuild them. I'll take the job, but I need boundaries. Grace comes first, always, and I don't work weekends. Done. And Ethan, thank you for trusting me with this. Don't thank me yet. You might regret it when I start redesigning all your protocols. He heard her smile through the phone. I'm counting on it. After they hung up, Ethan sat in the quiet of his kitchen, feeling like he'd just made a decision that would either save him or destroy the careful equilibrium he'd maintained for 5 years. The documents sat on the table, contract terms and salary figures, and the promise of something that looked suspiciously like purpose. He thought about Grace, about the boy at school who'd used poverty as a weapon, about the casual cruelty of economic hierarchy. He thought about Olivia Hart, self-made, despite her name using wealth as a tool to reshape systems that had tried to break her. And he thought about his own hands, trained to heal, trained to save, currently wasting themselves on overnight patrols and emergency interventions that helped one person at a time instead of building structures that could help thousands. The sunrise would come in a few hours. He'd make breakfast, drive Grace to school, have a conversation with her about what Dad's new job meant. Changes, good ones, the kind that came from taking risks instead of hiding in comfortable suffering. Somewhere across the city, in a penthouse office that never really closed, Olivia Hart was probably still working, still building her empire, still trying to prove that self-made meant something in a world that wanted to reduce her to inherited names and lucky breaks. They'd found each other through accident and necessity. Now they'd chosen to keep finding each other through intention and mutual recognition of the kind of people they were trying to become. It wasn't salvation, wasn't redemption, wasn't the kind of neat resolution that made good stories. It was just two people damaged and determined, deciding that maybe hiding from purpose was worse than risking the complications that came with stepping into it. That would have to be enough. For now. The press conference was scheduled for 2 p.m. on a Thursday, which meant every major news outlet in the city had time to arrive with cameras and questions. Olivia stood backstage at Hart Tower's Media Center, watching technicians adjust lighting and microphones, feeling her carefully constructed armor developing cracks. Marcus appeared at her elbow, tablet, glowing with talking points she'd already memorized and had no intention of using. The board is extremely uncomfortable with this approach. Caldwell thinks you're making yourself vulnerable. Zhang says it's unnecessary exposure. The board can express their concerns at next week's meeting, same as always. They're afraid you're going to damage the Hart brand by appearing weak. Olivia turned to face him fully, and whatever he saw in her expression made him take a small step backward. The Hart brand survived my great-grandfather's ruthlessness, my grandfather's incompetence, and my father's obsession. It'll survive me telling the truth for once. She walked onto the stage before Marcus could respond, before her own second-guessing could take root. The media pit was full, cameras tracking her movement, reporters leaning forward with the hunger that came from sensing a story that transcended quarterly earnings reports. No podium, no notes, just her standing in front of people whose job was to find weakness and exploit it, about to hand them vulnerability gift-wrapped. Thank you for coming. I'm not going to waste your time with prepared statements or corporate messaging. What I'm about to tell you is personal, and it's overdue. The room settled into attentive silence. Olivia took a breath, found the camera that was broadcasting live, and let the walls down. 6 weeks ago, I was in a car accident that should have killed me. I was bleeding out in an emergency room, terrified alone, asking someone to just make it fast because I didn't want to feel the pain anymore. The person who saved my life wasn't a surgeon, wasn't anyone with a fancy title or recognition. He was a night security guard named Ethan Ward. Murmurs rippled through the press corps. Olivia waited for them to settle. After he saved me, I asked him to stay quiet about it. I told him I didn't want the attention, didn't want rumors. What I really meant was that I didn't want to acknowledge I'd needed saving, that I'd been vulnerable, that someone I considered beneath my notice had seen me at my absolute worst and kept me alive anyway. Her throat tightened, but she pushed through. Ethan Ward is a decorated combat medic. He served 3 tours, saved 23 soldiers during an ambush under enemy fire, earned the Silver Cross for valor. When his wife died 5 years ago, he left the military to raise his 8-year-old daughter alone. He took a security job because it let him be present for her. And I looked at this man, this genuine hero, and I treated him like someone whose story didn't matter because it didn't serve my narrative. The camera lights felt hot, exposing exactly what she deserved. 2 weeks ago at a charity gala, Ethan saved another life. An elderly man went into cardiac arrest, and Ethan performed CPR until paramedics arrived. I watched him do it with the same calm competence he'd shown saving me, and I realized something that should have been obvious from the beginning. She paused, letting the weight settle. Leadership isn't about power. It's not about control or image or protecting your brand. It's about service. It's about showing up when no one's watching and doing the right thing even when there's no reward. Ethan Ward has been leading from the shadows while people like me collect credit in headlines. That ends today. Olivia looked directly into the camera, speaking to one person even though millions might hear. Ethan Ward, if you're watching, I need you to know something. You told me I'd see the sunrise. I've seen 50 sunrises since that night, every single one, because you refused to let me give up. You reminded me that compassion is the quietest form of strength, that helping people isn't about recognition, it's about showing up in the moment when seconds matter. Her voice cracked, but she didn't try to hide it. I'm sorry for asking you to hide. I'm sorry for treating your sacrifice like an inconvenience to my image. And I'm grateful that I know how to express that you exist in this world, making it better, one intervention at a time. The press erupted with questions. Olivia ignored them, walking off stage while Marcus scrambled to manage the chaos. In the green room, her phone was already exploding with calls and texts. Board members furious, PR team panicked, media outlets demanding follow-up interviews. And one text from an unknown number that made her chest tighten. You didn't need to do that, but thank you for trying. She knew Ethan's directness by now, recognized his resistance to spectacle even in 10 words. She typed back quickly. I needed to. For me, not for you, but I hope it helps anyway. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Finally, Grace saw it. She wants to know if you meant what you said about her dad being a hero. Olivia's eyes burned with tears she hadn't cried in years. Every word. Tell her she has the bravest father I've ever met. The response took longer this time. She says thank you, and she wants to meet you. Says anyone who thinks her dad is brave must be pretty smart. Despite everything, Olivia smiled. I'd like that very much. The press conference went viral within hours. Clips of Olivia's speech spread across social media, dissected and debated, turned into memes and think pieces about corporate leadership and authentic vulnerability. The board convened an emergency meeting where Caldwell demanded her resignation and Zhang abstained from the vote. And in the end, nothing changed because Olivia still controlled 51% of voting shares, and public opinion had swung overwhelmingly in her favor. People liked truth, apparently, or at least they liked watching a billionaire CEO strip away artifice and admit to being human. 2 days after the press conference, Ethan brought Grace to meet Olivia at a coffee shop in a neighborhood that split the difference between their worlds. Not Hart Tower with its intimidating marble, not Ethan's apartment with its threadbare carpets, but neutral ground where an 8-year-old could feel comfortable. Grace arrived wearing her best dress hair in careful braids, clutching a drawing she'd made of a woman in a blue gown standing next to a man in a security uniform. Between them, a heart drawn in careful red crayon. I made this for you. Dad says you like when people say thank you with actions, not just words. Olivia accepted the drawing like it was a Picasso, studying the details with genuine care. The figures were simple, but the heart between them glowed with the kind of sincerity only children managed. "This is beautiful, Grace. Thank you. I'm going to hang it in my office." "Really, even though it's rust crayon?" "Especially because it's crayon. The best gifts come from the heart, not from stores." Grace beamed, then turned serious in that abrupt way kids had. "Did my dad really save 23 soldiers?" "He did. He doesn't talk about it much. I think it makes him sad." Olivia glanced at Ethan, who was studying his coffee with intense focus. "Sometimes the hardest things we do are the ones we can't talk about, but that doesn't make them less important." They spent an hour together, conversation flowing easier than Olivia expected. Grace asked about running a company, about what it was like being the boss, about whether Olivia ever got scared making big decisions. Ethan mostly listened, interjecting occasionally with dad commentary about homework or manners, but his presence was steady grounding, a reminder that this unlikely connection had roots deeper than public relations or professional obligation. When they left, Grace hugged Olivia goodbye with the unself-conscious affection of someone who hadn't yet learned to guard her emotions. Ethan offered his hand, and Olivia shook it, feeling calluses earned from work that mattered. "She likes you," Ethan said quietly. "Grace doesn't like most people that fast." "She's remarkable. You're raising someone special." "I'm trying. Some days I wonder if trying is enough." "It's always enough. The trying is what counts." Their eyes met and held, and Olivia felt something shift between them. The dynamic evolving beyond savior and saved beyond employer and employee into something that looked suspiciously like friendship. The work began the following Monday. Ethan's first day at Heart Foundation started with Marcus handing him an office that felt absurdly luxurious compared to the security break room. Window view, actual desk computer that didn't take 5 minutes to boot up. He stood in the doorway, backpack over one shoulder, looking like someone who'd accidentally wandered into the wrong building. "You'll get used to it," Marcus said, not unkindly. "Everyone feels like an imposter the first week." "I'm not sure a week's going to cut it." But he settled in because that's what soldiers did. Adapt, overcome, figure out the mission parameters and execute. His mission was straightforward: review Heart Foundation's emergency response protocols and find the gaps that killed people. He found a lot of gaps. The meeting started small, just Ethan and department heads, but word spread fast that the new advisor didn't pull punches. He'd sit in conference rooms surrounded by people with them, both MBAs and medical degrees, and calmly dismantle their procedures with the kind of precision that came from having watched people die when protocols failed. Your cardiac emergency response plan assumes AED access within 90 seconds. That's optimistic in a 3-story building with locked equipment cabinets. Real-world deployment time is closer to 4 minutes, which means you're losing people in the gap. Your trauma kit inventory includes tourniquets designed for military use. They're effective but require training most civilians don't have. You need civilian-grade equipment with intuitive deployment. Your evacuation routes work fine on paper. In practice, during the Gala incident, panic bottlenecked both primary exits within 45 seconds. You need crowd flow management protocols, not just exit signs. He wasn't trying to be harsh. He was trying to save lives. But his directness made people uncomfortable in a workplace culture built on diplomatic language and consensus building. Olivia watched him work from a distance, at first getting reports from Marcus about the friction Ethan was creating with his refusal to soften criticism for the sake of feelings. But the data backed him up every time, and the people who got past their defensive reactions realized he was right. 3 weeks into his tenure, Olivia called him to her office. "You're making enemies." Ethan shrugged. "I'm making protocols that work. If that creates enemies, they're in the wrong profession." "I'm not criticizing. I'm warning you that institutional resistance is about to escalate. Caldwell is already complaining that you're overstepping, that you're not respecting the expertise of people with decades of experience. Decades of experience implementing protocols that have documented failure rates. Experience doesn't equal competence." Olivia leaned back in her chair, studying him with an expression that might have been amusement or admiration or both. "You don't compromise, do you?" "Not when lives are the variable." "Would you want me to?" "No, I'd want you to do exactly what you're doing, but I need you to understand that change at institutional scale requires political navigation, not just being right." Ethan considered this recognizing wisdom, even when it came wrapped in boardroom language. So teach me. You're good at this. The maneuvering, the strategy. Show me how to win without softening the message. Something shifted in Olivia's expression and walls coming down that Ethan hadn't realized were still up. Okay, but it goes both ways. You teach me about field medicine, emergency response, the things you know that I don't. We learn from each other. Deal. And they started meeting twice-a-week sessions that blurred the line between professional collaboration and something more personal. Olivia would explain organizational politics, how to build coalitions, which battles to fight publicly, and which to win through quiet pressure. Ethan would walk her through triage protocols, decision trees for emergency scenarios, the brutal mathematics of saving lives when resources were limited. But between the professional exchanges, they talked. About Grace, about Ethan's wife Sarah, and the grief that never quite stopped being sharp. About Olivia's father and the impossible standards she'd inherited, along with his debt. About the weight of responsibility, the cost of caring, the exhaustion of trying to matter in a world that made mattering so impossibly difficult. Why does it feel harder to save people now than it did in combat? Ethan asked one evening when they were reviewing hospital partnership proposals. Because in combat, the enemy is obvious. Here, the enemy is inertia, bureaucracy, the thousand small ways systems resist change, even when change is life-saving. That's depressing. That's truth, but here's the thing: inertia can be overcome. It just takes sustained pressure, strategic patience, and refusing to accept that how things are is how they have to stay. Ethan looked at her across the conference table, this woman who'd been a stranger 6 months ago, and now felt like someone who understood parts of him he'd barely understood himself. You're good at this, the pushing, the refusing to accept limitations. So are you just didn't realize you were doing it. 5 months into the Heart Foundation announced a major initiative, the Ward Center for Community Healing, a comprehensive facility offering free emergency medical care, mental health services, and veteran support programs. 5 stories, state-of-the-art equipment, staffed by people trained in protocols Ethan had designed. When Olivia showed him the architectural renderings, Ethan couldn't speak for a long moment. You're naming it after me. We're naming it after what you represent. Service without recognition. Competence without ego. The belief that helping people matters more than getting credit for it. I don't deserve this. You deserve exactly this. And Ethan, here's what you need to understand. This isn't about you. It's about creating a model that can be replicated in 50 cities, 100 cities. You're not just building one center. You're building a blueprint for systemic change. The weight of it settled on his shoulders, heavier than any pack he'd carried through desert heat. What if I fail? Then we learn from the failure and build something better. But you won't fail. You're constitutionally incapable of half-assing anything that might save lives. Construction began in early spring. Ethan walked the site, weekly hard hat in place, consulting with contractors about everything from oxygen line placement to the width of emergency corridors. Grace came, sometimes watched her father gesturing at concrete and steel, describing futures she couldn't quite visualize but believed in because Dad did. During one site visit, a construction worker approached Ethan with unusual hesitation. "Sir Ethan Ward, Wright, Combat Medic, 3187 Infantry." Ethan's chest tightened with recognition he couldn't quite place. The man pulled off his hard hat, revealing a scar running from temple to jaw. "Sergeant Marcus Cole, you pulled me out of an IED blast in Kandahar. I was bleeding out from shrapnel wounds, and you ran through active fire to get to me. Doctor said another 3 minutes and I'd have been gone." The memory surfaced sharp and unwanted. Desert heat screaming metal blood on sand that soaked it up like it was always thirsty for more. "Cole, Jesus, you made it home. Because of you, got a wife now, 2 kids. I'm alive because you refused to leave me behind." Cole's voice cracked. "When I heard you were building this place, I had to be part of it. I'm donating my labor. Every hour. It's not enough, but it's what I can give." Ethan couldn't find words. Cole gripped his shoulder, the kind of contact that said everything language couldn't, then went back to work. Grace tugged Ethan's sleeve. "Dad, was that one of the 23 soldiers?" "Yeah, kiddo, that was one of them. He seems really happy you saved him. I'm really happy he's alive to tell me about it." The encounters kept happening. A nurse at the hospital recognized Ethan from military publications. A physical therapist remembered hearing about the Silver Cross recipient who disappeared after discharge. Each connection was a reminder that the past didn't stay buried just because you stopped looking at it. The grand opening was scheduled for November, almost exactly 1 year after the night Ethan had saved Olivia. The planning consumed both of them, hours bleeding into each other as they coordinated speakers' media coverage, the logistics of unveiling something that felt simultaneously too ambitious and not ambitious enough. 2 weeks before the opening, Grace came home from school with an envelope bearing Heart Foundation letterhead. She handed it to Ethan with the kind of solemnity usually reserved for report cards and doctor's notes. Inside a letter offering Grace a full academic scholarship through college, covering tuition, books, enrichment programs, everything. Renewable annually based on academic progress, but with no stipulations beyond that. A future gift wrapped in professional stationery. Ethan read it 3 times before the words penetrated. This is too much. He called Olivia immediately, not caring that it was past 8 p.m. The scholarship for Grace. This is something she earned by being brilliant and having a father who prioritizes her education. It's not charity, Ethan. Heart Foundation has scholarship programs for children of medical professionals and first responders. Grace qualifies in both categories. You designed this for her. I designed it for kids like her. She just happens to be one of them. Olivia's voice softened. Let me do this. Let Heart Foundation invest in someone who's going to change the world someday. Because Grace is going to change the world, and giving her the tools to do it isn't charity, it's strategy. Ethan closed his eyes, fighting against pride that wanted to refuse and pragmatism that knew Grace deserved every opportunity. She'd have to accept it herself. I won't make this decision for her. Of course not. But Ethan, when she asks why someone would do this, tell her it's because her father taught a woman who'd forgotten how to care that compassion isn't weakness. It's the strongest thing we can build our lives on. Grace accepted the scholarship after asking approximately 700 questions about what it meant and whether it meant she had to become a doctor, because she was thinking maybe architect or engineer. Ethan assured her the money didn't come with career requirements, just an opportunity. The night before the Ward Center opening, Ethan couldn't sleep. He stood at Grace's window watching the city lights, feeling the weight of tomorrow pressing against his chest. This was it. The moment when his quiet life ended and something louder began, whether he was ready or not. His phone buzzed. Olivia texting at 1 a.m. because apparently neither of them slept the night before big things. You ready for tomorrow? No. But I'm showing up anyway. That's all courage is. Showing up when you're terrified. Her next text came slower, more careful. Thank you, Ethan, for trusting me with this. For letting me build something that honors what you represent. You're the one who built it. I just pointed at problems. We built it. Together. That's what makes it matter. He didn't respond immediately, but his chest felt less tight. She was right. They'd built this together, two people from different worlds who'd found common ground in the belief that helping people wasn't optional, it was obligation. The Ward Center opening dawned cold and brilliant November sun cutting through crisp air with knife-edge clarity. By 9 a.m., the sidewalks around the new building were packed with people, veterans in dress uniforms. Hospital staff Ethan recognized. Community members whose lives would be changed by access to care they'd never been able to afford. And reporters. So many reporters, cameras everywhere documenting the billionaire CEO and the combat medic who'd somehow convinced each other that changing systems was possible. Ethan stood backstage with Grace, who'd insisted on wearing her best dress. Despite the cold, her scholarship letter folded carefully in her pocket like a talisman. You nervous, Dad? Terrified. You're always brave when you're scared. You told me that once. Did I? Yeah, when I was afraid of the dark and you said being brave doesn't mean not being scared, it means doing the thing anyway. Ethan pulled her into a hug, breathing in strawberry shampoo and the particular smell of Grace that meant home and purpose and every reason he'd kept breathing after Sarah died. When did you get so smart? I've always been this smart. You're just noticing more now. The ceremony began with speeches from hospital administrators, city officials, people praising Heart Foundation's vision and Ethan's expertise. He stood to the side, watching Olivia command the stage with the same confidence she'd brought to boardrooms, but tempered now with something warmer, more human. When she introduced him, the crowd erupted. Ethan walked to the microphone feeling exposed, visible, every instinct screaming to retreat back into shadows. But Grace was watching. Olivia was watching. The center bore his name and represented everything he'd learned about saving lives beyond the immediate moment. So he spoke. "I'm not comfortable with microphones. I'm better with heartbeats." The crowd laughed softly and he felt tension ease. But if there's one thing I've learned in the past year, it's that healing isn't just for the wounded. It's for everyone who still cares enough to help them. He looked at Olivia, then at Grace, then at the building behind them. We all carry scars, pain, regrets. The question isn't whether we have them. The question is what we build with them in. Do we build walls to hide behind or bridges to reach others? The words came easier now, muscle memory from a different kind of combat. I chose bridges. This center is a bridge between military medicine and civilian care, between crisis response and systemic prevention, between helping one person at a time and building structures that help thousands. He paused. A year ago, someone I barely knew promised me I'd see a sunrise. I've seen 365 sunrises since then, and everyone has been a chance to choose bridges over walls. Grace ran onto stage, holding up a drawing, the same one she'd made months ago, Dad in his security uniform, standing next to a woman in blue heart, glowing between them. "My dad gives his jacket to people who need it," she announced to the crowd with the confidence of someone who believed everyone cared about her truth. "And his heart shines when he helps." The image on the overhead screen shifted to show Grace's drawing crayon colors bright against professional presentations. The crowd melted into applause that built into something overwhelming. Olivia stepped forward, pulling out a wooden box Ethan hadn't seen before. She opened it carefully, revealing a medal. Simple, beautiful, engraved with words he had to blink to read. "Please don't make it fast. Stay." His own words thrown back at him like an anchor. "You told me I'd see the sunrise," Olivia said, her voice carrying through speakers to the assembled crowd. "I've seen 1,000 since that night. Every single one because you refused to let me give up." She pinned the medal to his chest with hands that trembled slightly. "Don't fade into the background, Ethan. Don't leave. The world needs people like you. I need people like you." The crowd stood, applause thundering, but Ethan only saw Grace beaming with pride, Olivia finally free from the armor she'd worn for so long, and the building behind them that represented hope made concrete. Then something happened that split the moment wide open. 23 people stood up simultaneously in different sections of the crowd. Veterans, all of them wearing dress uniforms or the kind of bearing that marked military service permanently. They moved forward as one, converging on the stage, and Ethan's breath stopped because he recognized them. All of them. Every single person he'd pulled from that ambush 7 years ago. Sergeant Cole leading them, presenting a folded flag with the kind of ceremony that made civilian observers go silent. Behind him, Lieutenant Anderson, who'd lost a leg but was walking steady on a prosthetic. Private Chen, who'd written Ethan letters for 2 years after discharge. Staff Sergeant Williams, whose wedding invitation Ethan had declined because he couldn't face the reminder of everything he'd lost. "Sir," Cole's voice carried across the sudden quiet, "we heard you were building this. We couldn't stay away. You gave us our lives back. We wanted to be here when you gave that gift to other people." They saluted in unison, military precision, despite the years and distance. Ethan couldn't move, couldn't speak, could barely breathe around the emotion crushing his chest. Grace slipped her hand into his, grounding him. Olivia stepped back, giving him space, but her eyes were wet, and her smile carried understanding. That went bone deep. The 23 soldiers stood at attention, and slowly other veterans in the crowd stood too, joining them until what felt like half the audience was on their feet in tribute to something that transcended ceremony. Ethan found his voice barely at ease. "Please, you don't salute me. You never had to salute me. Respect isn't about rank, sir. It's about what you did when it mattered." The words landed like absolution Ethan hadn't known he needed. He'd spent 5 years believing he'd failed the ones who didn't make it home. But here stood 23 who did, living proof that his trauma had purpose, that his nightmares bought futures for people who deserved them. The ceremony dissolved into something less formal, less staged. Veterans greeting each other, swapping stories. Grace collecting autographs from soldiers who'd become her dad's legend. Olivia standing beside Ethan, both of them watching connections form in real time. You didn't know they'd be here, Ethan said quietly. Marcus may have reached out to Cole, who may have spread the word, but I didn't know for sure. Was it too much? It was perfect. They stood together as the sun climbed higher, warming air that had started cold, and the ward center doors opened to the public for the first time. People streamed inside, seeking care, finding hope, discovering that maybe the systems designed to help them could actually work when someone cared enough to build them right. 1 year later, Ethan stood in the ward center's training facility, teaching a class of new medics the difference between textbook medicine and keeping people alive when everything went wrong. His students were young, eager, possessed of the kind of optimism that hadn't yet been tempered by watching good protocols fail because humans were messy and emergencies didn't read instruction manuals. The most important thing I can teach you isn't in any manual, he told them, pacing between simulation stations. It's this: when someone is dying, they're not a case study. They're not a training scenario. They're someone's father, mother, child, someone whose absence will leave holes in the world. Your job is to hold those holes closed long enough for healing to happen. Everything else, protocols, equipment, expertise, exists to serve that purpose. Don't ever forget it. Grace sat in the back row, high school freshman, now taking notes for a school paper about medical career paths. She'd grown 3 inches and developed her mother's stubborn chin and Ethan's tendency to ask questions that cut through pretense to truth. Olivia appeared in the doorway, no longer CEO. She'd stepped down 6 months ago to run Heart Foundation full-time, pouring her considerable will into replicating the Ward Center model across 15 cities. She caught Ethan's eye, gestured that she'd wait. Class ended. Students filtered out, discussing trauma response techniques and the ethics of triage. Grace hugged her father goodbye, heading to meet friends, her scholarship-funded future bright enough to hurt if you looked directly at it. Walk with me, Olivia asked. They moved through the center, past exam rooms and counseling spaces, past veterans receiving support, and families accessing care they'd never been able to afford before. The building hummed with purpose, with lives being saved in increments too small for headlines, but large enough to matter infinitely. Chicago approved funding, Olivia said. Seattle's breaking ground next month. We've got commitments from 7 more cities. That's 15 centers in 2 years. You're building an empire. We're building a movement. Don't undersell your contribution. They reached the memorial wall where photographs hung of patients whose lives the center had saved. Hundreds of faces, each one representing a moment when systems worked because someone cared enough to make them work. Do you regret it? Olivia asked. The visibility, the recognition, all the things you were trying to avoid. Ethan considered the question, looking at faces on the wall, thinking about students he was training, about Grace's scholarship and Cole's gratitude, and the 23 soldiers who'd shown up when it mattered. No, I thought I wanted to disappear. Turns out I just wanted to matter quietly. But mattering loudly is okay too, as long as the noise has purpose. That's very evolved of you. I had a good teacher, someone who showed me that caring about outcomes is more important than controlling how you're perceived. Olivia smiled, and in it, Ethan saw the woman who'd gripped his hand in terror and whispered, "Please make it fast," transformed into someone who'd learned that fast wasn't the goal, staying was. They stood together in the center they'd built from crisis and necessity, from Olivia's resources and Ethan's expertise, from the understanding that saving lives wasn't a one-time intervention, but a sustained commitment to building systems that worked when tested. Outside, the sun climbed toward noon, painting walls in amber light. Another day, another chance to choose bridges over walls, to show up when scared, to remember that heroes weren't the ones who sought glory, but the ones who simply refused to let people suffer when help was possible. Thank you, Ethan said quietly, for seeing what I could be when I'd forgotten. Thank you for teaching me that wealth without compassion is just accumulation. You saved my life twice, Ethan. Once from dying, once from living like I was already dead. They walked back through corridors that smelled of antiseptic and hope, past people seeking healing, and finding it, past evidence that sometimes the best things built were built by people who'd been broken first and learned how to use the cracks to let light through. Grace was waiting by the entrance, talking animatedly to a veteran about prosthetic design advancements. She saw her father and waved this brilliant girl who'd grown up watching her dad choose presence over profit and learned that mattering was measured in moments, not money. Ethan waved back, and beside him, Olivia laughed at something Grace said, and the sound carried through the space they'd built together, filling corners that had been empty with the knowledge that compassion was the quietest form of strength, and sometimes the strongest thing you could do was simply stay.